Hey, Tom here from the Run Testers. In this video, we are going to be doing our full review of the Brooks Glycerin Max. Let's have a look. The Brooks Glycerin Max costs £180 or $200. It weighs 313 grams or 11 ounces for men in a size 8, and the drop is 6mm. The Brooks Glycerin Max takes the fundamentals of the popular glycerin line and beefs up the midsole with the brand's newest foam, DNA Tuned. Made from dual cell technology, DNA Tuned is a nitrogen-infused foam made up of large cells in the heel to provide soft, comfortable landings, with smaller cells in the forefoot to promote a responsive toe-off. That midsole combines with Brooks' noticeable glide roll rocker that pushes the foot forward to promote a smooth heel-to-toe transition. There's also a thick rubber outsole to both protect the midsole foam and deliver a high level of grip, as well as a plush engineered mesh upper to ensure plenty of comfort for a variety of runs.
So when it comes to fit of the Brooks Glycerin Max, I was very happy with my normal running shoe size with the shoe. I've got a UK 9 here, which is a US 10. I've used that across the Brooks range in general for many years, and I had the right fit with the shoe, good amount of room in the toe box. I think the heel design is a little better on the shoe than I found of some other Brooks shoes of late, in terms of it doesn't irritate my Achilles at all, whereas the Ghost 16 did irritate me a bit. It was a very structured heel counter. You still do have a fairly significant internal heel counter and plenty of padding on the back of the shoe, as you'd expect from Brooks, but yeah, it didn't bother me in any way, and overall I found the fit very good in my normal size.
So when it comes to fit, I ran in my regular running shoe size in Brooks, which is UK 8.5, and overall I found the fit really roomy. There's plenty of room across the toes, length and across the uppers. This has got a really spacious toe box. It's nice and airy and flexible, loads of wiggle room, super comfortable, a bit like the Hyperion Max 2. No pinching on the toe knuckles, but there is just a right amount of hold there. As you go back up, one thing I did notice, there's a little bit of bulging with the tongues. I find it a little bit hard to get the lace to sit and hold really securely across the top of the foot there. But moving back into the shoes, the heel collars, they are quite narrow. They look quite narrow when you first see the shoe, but actually there's quite a lot of room in the heels. They weren't quite as secure and snug as maybe I would like, but the tongue's nicely padded, so you've got all that kind of plushness that you'll get from the fit of a sort of super cushioned shoe. And yeah, as you'd kind of expect. Otherwise, I just found this to be a really nice, roomy fit, and I would recommend going true to size in these shoes.
So in terms of fit, I would say it's been pretty much spot on for me in the Glycerin Max. I think it's, I've had mine in the UK at size 8. That's my typical running shoe size. I would say my experience has been a cross between using the Ghost Max. I haven't used the Ghost Max 2 yet, and also the latest Glycerin. I think from a Ghost Max point of view, a very similar upper in terms of how that feels on and around your feet. I think the Glycerin, in the sense that it is, I would say, similarly quite a broad, kind of more accommodating, roomy shoe compared to the Ghost Max 2. And if you were looking for that slightly more roomy fit, then I think that's what you're getting here in the Glycerin Max, and follows that kind of glycerin mold. I think ultimately space up front of the toes, generally a very naturally broad kind of fitting shoe in general. What you'd expect to see in a glycerin shoe, a good level of padding around the heel collar, a very kind of traditional padded tongue, those kind of spongy laces that we associate with the glycerin shoes. And it's all been very comfortable. I've had no issues in terms of, lockdown, getting something that fits very securely and feels comfortable in the right places. So for me, I think going true to size has been absolutely fine. As I said, I think it's a mix between the Glycerin and the Ghost Max. The Glycerin in terms of that kind of roominess, the Max in terms of that kind of style of upper and how that upper fit. So yeah, all good for me in terms of going true to size in the Glycerin Max.
So the fit for me in the Brooks Glycerin Max, I'm a size 8 in the UK. I found this to be a very comfortable shoe. I would say it's a very roomy shoe. So if you're the sort of person that likes to have a little bit of space before the big toe, you might have a little bit too much in this, so you could size down half size. It's probably a bit more space than I normally have in a lot of my shoes. I tend to wear my shoes a little bit leaner, so I would stick to my UK size 8 in these shoes because I found them to be absolutely fine. And the plush upper is quite roomy when you put your foot in, but you can tie it down quite nicely without having to really pull it in, and you get a nice comfortable fit. So I would stay to my size in the Brooks Glycerin Max, but you might want to size down half a size if you're on the fence and you want to have a little bit less room in the forefoot around the side and at the front.
So in testing, I've done around 35 miles in the Brooks Glycerin Max. 90% of those have been slow and easy recovery style miles. I've also whacked in a few up-tempo miles just to see what happens when you ask a little more of this Max Stack beast of a shoe. Most of that's been on the road, though I did get them muddy on a couple of wet river path runs, and you can see I've somewhat ruined the lovely white looks that you got from the uppers here already. They've gone grey, which is interesting. I like the colourway, but that's an interesting thing to consider. Now, not just that area of this shoe has surprised me. I don't usually go in for this really, really big, massive midsole, maxed out kind of shoe. I wasn't a big fan of the Hoka Skyward X. I found it a bit wild and unstable at times on that big stack. I don't mind the New Balance More V4. I'm not running the V5 yet, but I'd rarely reach for these types of super plush shoes, even for my easy runs. I tend to prefer something that's a little lower stacked, cushioned still, but lighter and perhaps more responsive than pillowy soft. And this is about as big as the stacks come when it comes to shoes. However, I am drawn to the Glycerin Max for a few reasons. I think they've got great easy comfort. The step and feel is lovely, from the roomy mesh uppers to the unfussy fit. I think they really feel nice on the foot, and they run lighter on the foot than the whacking great profile and the weight on the scales suggests they should. Granted, they are still a heavy shoe in that kind of 300 gram plus category, though they're actually lighter than the Asics Gel Nimbus 26 and the Ghost Max 2. Now, I also think the midsole delivers. The combination of that nitrogen foam and the rocker, I think, works really well together, offers loads of road impact, reducing softness, oodles of protection, but with a smooth clip-along ride in a plush package overall. I think you've got everything here that most runners will want from an easy day shoe, but without feeling too soggy, too mushy, or too laboured. There's a bit of energy to the new DNA-tuned foam. There's a resilience and a bit of spring, particularly when you come onto that kind of forefoot where you've got those smaller cells. It gives you something back quite quickly to make the easy miles, I think, feel a touch more effortless. And despite the whacking great high stack, I actually find the wide platform that you've got here is a big wide platform. I find it much more reliable and stable than the kind of out of control feeling that I got in something like the Skyward X. That's perhaps not surprising for Brooks, who sort of tend to specialise in more stable shoes, and they've had to keep that here if they can. And despite that massive stack, I still feel largely in control of the Glycerin Max. This isn't a shoe that controls me, I control it, and I really like that.
Now, in terms of my running experience with the Glycerin Max, I've done over 50k in this shoe now. Now, this actually isn't the first time I've seen the Glycerin Max. Now, back earlier in the year when I was doing the Barcelona half marathon with Brooks, myself and Kieran were out with Brooks. We got to see a prototype version of the Glycerin Max. It looked very different to this shoe, but ultimately I think, I didn't get to run in it. I did get to briefly walk around in it, and what was very clear is that it felt, the DNA tuned kind of midsole felt very different to the DNA Loft V3, V2 foams that we've seen in Brooks' most recent shoes. I think when I say different, I think it was clearly a lot more plush feeling, and that's the biggest thing I took away just from that kind of brief time in it. Now, in terms of it falling into the Glycerin Max that we know now, I do think that Brooks has dialed back a little bit of that plushness, but it definitely does feel plush, and it does feel slightly more plush than the DNA Loft V3 foam that we've seen in some of its shoes more recently. I don't think it's, as I say, as plush as what I felt initially in that kind of prototype version, which is probably understandable because I think, ultimately it wanted to temper that a little bit, make sure it was, still had that stable feel of a Brooks shoe, particularly those kind of, the Ghost and the Glycerin shoes that we've seen so far. So I think, that really is representative of my time in the Glycerin Max. It feels a little bit like the Glycerin, feels a little bit like the Ghost. You've got a big stack of cushioning there. There's some bounce there. It's not super aggressive, but it's definitely a lively, bouncy feel here. I think crucially, that foam is spread across a kind of pretty broad base, which I think, is very much what I expected to see from a Brooks shoe, still being very stable ultimately, and that's kind of what I found. And yeah, I think the biggest characteristics I found is that it is been very comfortable. There's been kind of a nice level of bounce there. It's felt stable. It's felt best suited for when I've done my kind of easy runs. I think when I've kind of tried to step the pace up in this, go from moderate to kind of more up-tempo paces, I felt like it's a bit like the Glycerin. It feels like I'd like it to be a little bit lighter. I did actually do a kind of quicker kind of park run outing with it with Tom recently, or at the weekend, and you know, I ran around pretty quickly in that run. You know, not my quickest, but ultimately I felt like if I had a lighter shoe on me, I think all the characteristics of this shoe in a slightly lighter you know, design might have made it a more suitable shoe for more up-tempo running. But ultimately I felt it was most comfortable at those kind of easy recovery paces where it did feel very good to run in, and I felt I could, you know, put a lot of time in this shoe. I think more so than the Glycerin, I think, for me, in terms of my experience. So yeah, I think, you know, I've had very good runs. I haven't had really any bad runs. I think when I've used it for those kind of easy recovery style runs, it's felt very well suited. When I tried to pick up the pace, it doesn't feel as good for me, but ultimately I don't think that's really what it's designed for. I think in terms of durability, I mean, over 50k, and that outsole really hasn't taken much of a hit, really. There's a good amount of rubber here, kind of what we expect to see on a Glycerin shoe, on a Ghost shoe, where, you know, this is going to be a shoe that's going to be able to soak up a lot of your time, and I can't see that being any different with the Glycerin Max. A good amount of rubber, the traction grip's been good. I've done one rainy run in it, it's been absolutely fine. So yeah, from a durability point of view, I'd be very confident this is going to hold up over a long period. So yeah, all very solid in terms of my time with the Glycerin Max. Is it the best Brooks shoe in this kind of category? Is it the best kind of cushioned shoe you should get? I will get into that in my verdict.
So I have been a big fan of the Brooks Glycerin range for quite a while. I quite often put it into my top lists for cushioned daily shoes. I really like the foam in the Glycerin, the DNA Loft V3. I think it's a nice balanced foam. It's not too soft, it's not too firm, which means it's quite a versatile cushion trainer. I was very excited when the Glycerin Max came out. I love big cushion shoes. I love soft shoes. I love bouncy shoes. So this looks like the sort of shoe that I'm really going to go for, especially because I like the Glycerin range quite a lot. So the first thing I would say about this shoe is that despite the fact that it looks like a massive shoe, it is actually quite a heavy shoe, which is not surprising considering the size, but it doesn't ride like that. I've actually found this to be a really enjoyable shoe to run in for a variety of runs. I've done about 100k in this shoe so far. I've been using it pretty much exclusively since I got it a couple of weeks back, and I've been using it for different runs. So I've used it for a lot of easy sessions, but I've also used it for a few interval sessions as well. It's not the best shoe in the world for interval sessions. There's definitely shoes that I'd much rather use for those, but it's surprising how good this is when you pick up the pace in it. A shoe this big, a shoe with this much stack in it, and a shoe from Brooks with that much foam in it is probably I wouldn't have expected it to be as versatile as this shoe is. So the reason for that is it has this DNA tuned midsole foam in it, which has got these this design where the back section, the foam uses larger cells, so I think they're meant to be a bit airier, so they're a bit softer. So when you're landing, it sort of compresses a little bit more and you get a softer landing. And then you get these smaller cell designs in the forefoot, which means it's a bit more responsive and a bit more compressed, so that you can pick up the pace a little bit more. The other big thing is this rocker in it as well. The rocker is really noticeable and it really does tip you forward as you're running. So that combination of the midsole foam and that rocker does really make it a nice shoe for picking up the pace a bit. I'd probably say it's a shoe that's probably better designed for those daily runs, those longer runs where you want a nice, consistent, comfortable pace. I definitely wouldn't say you'd get this shoe if you're going to use it for specifically for interval sessions or racing or anything like that. Although if you're a runner and you're maybe doing a half marathon or even a marathon and you're looking for a shoe that is all out comfort and you want to cross the finish line, probably a very good option for that. So across all of those runs, really been impressed by this shoe. I think the thing about Brooks is that they always want to make their shoes as stable as possible. This is obviously quite an extreme shoe when it comes to midsole foams, but Brooks has done a good job keeping the shoe really stable despite this big midsole stack. One of the reasons is it's a bit wider, but also the foam is still a relatively balanced, dense foam in comparison to some max cushion shoes out there. So as a result, you do get a much more stable ride than you might get with a really soft foam, something like the Invincible or something like that, where the foam is really squishy and bouncy. This is actually a little bit more balanced. So if you go out for running this, you're not going to instantly go, wow, that's really soft. But when you're running in it, it is a nice level of comfort in the midsole, but you can still pick up the pace quite nicely because it has this more balanced, sturdier midsole foam. So as well as that, I would say that the Outsole, I'm really impressed with the outsole. So very little signs of wear and tear over the course of my running. It's a very thick layer of rubber on that outsole, and it's quite grippy as well on the wet ground. So very much impressed with that. I was out running today in it, in fact, and I was on some quite muddy, gravelly public footpaths. Felt absolutely great. The only issue is that I keep getting it really muddy, and I've had to wash it a few times because if you are using it on muddy roads, you're going to ruin this beautiful white design. So overall, it's a really solid, balanced max stack shoe, which I think is one of the better options out there when it comes to max stack shoes, because you get a good trade-off with this, between the stability, the cushioning, the comfort, all those sorts of things. It sort of hits the sweet spot for all of those, and it's a really, really nice shoe to do lots of different types of running. So I think it's a very good, accessible shoe for a lot of people.
So I've run 70k in the Brooks Glycerin Max, been using it for a lot of daily training, kind of easy runs, and I also used it for the first long run of my marathon training block. I did a 30k run at easy to steady pace, so moving down from a nice relaxed pace towards kind of 6-minute miling or so by the end. So it's got a really nice ride, I think. It's a shoe I've enjoyed running in. You've got a nice bit of softness at the back as a heel striker, and appreciate that, but then it doesn't get kind of too soft or in any way stodgy. You roll through very nicely, you get a little bit of pop from the foam at the forefoot there, and it does feel quite responsive, and I think feels quite light on the foot, despite the fact it is a big shoe and it is fairly heavy. Like, the weight is about in line with other big cushion shoes, but like other Brooks shoes like the Ghost Max 2, it does run a little bit lighter than the weight on the scales. I find it does tick over quite nicely. I think part of that is just down to the rocker on the shoe, which is really well designed, or I find it very easy to get in sync with anyway. Like the Brooks Ghost Max 2, just feels like shoe, just rolls you through very nicely onto your toes and you carry on your way. It's not like a very propulsive ride. There's not a lot of big sink in and spring there, but it's comfortable. You move well in the shoe. For such a big shoe, it is not that noticeable on the foot. Overall, I'd say that I prefer this kind of style of shoe in the Brooks range compared to the higher drop Ghost and Glycerin, the kind of classic designs. Shoes I still do like, but I personally prefer this rocker on the shoe and the lower drop. It just seems to make it a bit easier to get into a nice flow with the shoe. So definitely for general easy runs, the shoe's worked really well. It's protected the legs. Like I say, I've been up in the mileage a little bit lately, and yeah, it's a good shoe to pull on, protects the legs without being stodgy. It does have a little bit of pop to it. It does feel like you can move fast in it, and that's why I did want to use it for this 30k run I had, where I knew I was going to be moving pretty hard by the end. It was my longest run in a while as well, so I wanted a nice protective shoe like this. And for the most part, it did the job pretty well. Certainly felt like it carried me through the distance nice and comfortably, and my legs felt pretty good about it the next day. But in that last kind of 10k, where I was just upping the pace a little bit, there were certainly times where I started to wish I had just a lighter shoe on my foot, and one that has a bit more response off the toes. Like, it's not really a shoe really geared up to run very fast or be very versatile, I still think. And something like the Super Blast was definitely the shoe that came to mind in that last 10k. I was thinking, like, I could have a shoe of this much stack height, but 60-70 grams lighter with a poppier foam, and just get a bit more back from it as I pushed the pace a little bit. So it doesn't feel like a very versatile shoe to me. Having done that run in it and some other slightly faster stuff, it feels very much still like a cruiser, and that's fine. Like, it doesn't need to be a versatile shoe, but once you get to these kind of really high prices, you start talking about really exciting foams, you do start thinking about very impressive shoes like the Asics Superblast 2 or the New Balance Ballos that can do a bit of everything, have lots of foam underfoot, are really, they're expensive shoes, but they do create quite a special feeling underfoot. And the Glycerin Max doesn't really give me that on the run test. Like, I just found it was a good shoe, a really good cushion shoe, in fact, but not one that necessarily shone for me. And it's got a price tag that kind of suggests that it should be shining a little bit more for me. It feels much more like, there's a few of these are out now, these very expensive just cushion shoes, and that's good. They deliver a good experience, but I'm not sure I'm ready to pay this kind of money for a shoe that does that, when I could be looking at a more versatile shoe that still has lots of cushioning, but has a bit more going for it than just being, a really nice cruiser.
So my verdict on the Brooks Glycerin Max is that it is a pretty likeable, max cushion shoe that I think is well suited to easy and recovery style running. So like a lot of Brooks shoes, and it definitely does have that kind of Brooks DNA running through this shoe to make sure it feels familiar, but ultimately it does have that DNA tuned cushioning technology, which I think really slightly, takes Brooks's shoes where it needs to go. I think, this is a really good showcase of that new cushioning technology. Now, in terms of how it or where it sits in terms of other Brooks's shoes, I think ultimately it does, sit with a lot of other shoes in Brooks's range. Now, obviously the Glycerin is the most natural one to kind of, think about it against. And then obviously that is cheaper. This is, slightly more expensive than the Glycerin. This is heavier than the Glycerin. But ultimately I found that I can, take that added weight when I feel that the ride is slightly nicer and more enjoyable in this shoe, the Glycerin Max and the Glycerin, which I feel that, was fine, very comfortable, protective, but I think ultimately just didn't give me enough in terms of that overall ride. I think you look at the Brooks Ghost Max. Now, I've only used the Ghost Max, not the Ghost Max 2. I thought that was a solid shoe. I think, again, another, a good max cushion shoe, but was it a standout one? Possibly not. And I think it needed something different in that midsole. And I think that's what we're getting here in the Glycerin Max ultimately. So I think ultimately that's probably what we're going to see in the Ghost Max 3. I feel that's naturally what's going to happen here. I think I also have to talk about the Brooks Go 16, which I think for me has been my favourite Brooks shoe, a new Brooks shoe. I think obviously that doesn't have the DNA tuned cushioning, still has, but I think had that kind of upgraded DNA Loft V3 foam in there. It's lighter, feels a little bit better at moderate kind of paced runs as well too, and I think can offer similar qualities to the Glycerin Max, just in a slightly different way. And I think personally that's probably the shoe, if I had to pick between those shoes, that's the one I would probably go for, particularly given the price as well too. In terms of other shoes outside of Brooks's range, it's definitely sitting in the category of max cushion shoes like the Asics Gel Nimbus. I think the Saucony Triumph as well too. I think, considering the price, it's sitting against things like the Hoka Skyward X, which I think ultimately is probably a little bit more of a fun shoe, a little bit more versatile, whereas I think this is probably a little bit more kind of reliable and stable and controlled in terms of that overall feel. I think it ultimately sits well with those shoes at that price range. I'd probably take it over the Gel Nimbus. I'd take it over the new Saucony Triumph as well too. If you wanted to spend a little bit more, then you've got the Super Blast 2 there. The Super Blast doesn't look like it's ever going to be very easy to find. It's going to be reduced in price. So you're looking at the Super Blast 2. Ultimately, that's a little bit more. That's going to get you something that can work at easy kind of paces, but it definitely feels better at more tempo, faster paces. For me, yeah, a max cushion shoe here in the Glycerin Max. That's very, very comfortable. Has a little bit of liveliness from that kind of new foam and just feels very solid overall. It's, I think for me, a nicer shoe than the Glycerin. I think, from the Ghost Max that I've tested, I think I would pick it over that as well too. And I think, I'd probably go for the Ghost just because of value, the Ghost 16. But I think, the Glycerin Max is a nice addition. I'm looking forward to seeing where Brooks takes that cushion technology, most importantly, because I think this is a good sign of where things need to go.
So my verdict on the Brooks Glycerin Max, I'm a massive fan of this. I actually put it in my favourite Easy Day shoe picks for the video that we just released, because I think it does a lot of things really well. It is a comfortable shoe. It's got just enough softness in it, in that massive stack of midsole foam, to have a nice, comfortable, easy day ride. Great for recovery runs, but it's also balanced enough to be used as a slightly faster shoe as well. I don't think I'd put it up there with things like the Super Blast or anything like that. I think it's still very much firmly in the easy day, comfortable daily session category, but you can do a bit more in it. I can definitely pick up the pace a bit in this shoe. I definitely feel like it's got a really nice smooth transition in it. So if you're going out and you're doing marathon training sessions and you want something to maintain a 5-minute kilometer pace, this is a good shoe for it, because it will just roll you forwards nicely and it's not going to hold you back. It doesn't sap your energy with a really soft midsole foam. It's just really well balanced. I think for me, it's a shoe that, as part of a rotation, for me, I'd use it probably more as my easy shoe and daily shoe. I wouldn't use it for faster sessions, but if you are a runner that just wants one pair of shoes and you're maybe a newer runner, or maybe your focus is general running and you're not too worried about speed, you just want comfort and distance, I think that's a good shoe for it as well. I'd definitely be happy to run a marathon in this shoe if I wasn't going to go for a PB, because I just think it would be a really nice, consistent rolling shoe to do that in. Alternatives to this shoe, there's a lot of max cushion shoes out at the moment. I think there's other options like the Puma Mag Max Nitro. It looks quite similar in a lot of ways to the shoe, but I'd say that the Mag Max is just a little bit firmer for me. Similar stability to it. Actually, very similar shoes in a lot of ways, but I think that the Brooks Glycerin Max just has a little bit more to that midsole, a little bit more energy in it, and a little bit more softness, which is what I look for in a shoe. So all in all, I think this is a really good entry into the max stack shoe world, and I think a lot of people are going to like this shoe. I think it's a very accessible shoe, and if you are looking for full-on comfort but you still want to have a little bit of flexibility in what you're doing with your shoes, I think this is a really good shout.
So my verdict on the Brooks Glycerin Max, this is a really good shoe. It's a very enjoyable shoe to run in. It basically really takes all the classic stuff you expect from Brooks. Comfort, stability for a neutral shoe, like consistent foams that don't bottom out at all over long runs, and it elevates them all a little bit to create a shoe that I think is a step up on the classic Glycerin, on the Ghost Max 2, on the classic Ghost, just makes those daily training runs a bit more fun, has a bit more to it, a bit more pop off the toes. In general, is a very good shoe. Problem is for me, I don't think it elevates it that much from all those other Brooks shoes, which are all very good shoes as well and are all a lot cheaper. I don't think it carves out a new niche for Brooks as a plateless super trainer in the mold of things like the Super Blast, which have become a bit more popular now on the market. People looking for really versatile shoes that don't have a plate in but big high stacks. This does feel like it will do the same kind of job as the Glycerin and the Ghost Max, just with a slightly nicer feeling underfoot. Probably puts it more in line with big cushion expensive shoes like the Puma Mag Max Nitro or even the Hoka Skyward X, which does have a plate but is really a shoe geared up to be very cushioned for easy runs. And of those, the Skyward X is a really impressive shoe. That's one that I do think does deliver something a bit special for its price. Like, I still necessarily wouldn't pay that price for a big cushion shoe, but I think it does feel very fun underfoot and is clearly different to some cheaper shoes in the Hoka range. I like this more than the Puma Mag Max Nitro shoe. I just didn't get on with at all. Just found it a real slog to run in that shoe. This certainly feels a lot lighter and nimbler and more enjoyable underfoot for me, but like I say, it doesn't really step up from kind of classic cushion shoes enough, I think, to be worth its price. So something like the Saucony Hurricane 24, my favourite cushion shoe of the year so far. I used it again today. Just, it delivers quite a similar experience, but actually I probably like it a little bit more because it's got a really nice rocker as well on the shoe and just feels actually a bit more sprightly underfoot than the Glycerin Max for me, and it's available for a much lower price. It's just more of a standard, cushion shoe price, and that's kind of what I'd expect to pay for it, really. And actually even the Brooks Ghost Max 2 I got on with really well, has a lot of the same kind of benefits of the Glycerin Max, nice rocker, feels lighter than it is, cushioned, but has a little bit of versatility. And yeah, the Glycerin Max, it does have some nice pop off the toes at times, but it's still not a shoe I'd really want to go out and run fast in. Still feels very big. And I guess it might fulfill the brief for lots of people who are looking at the shoe. Like, it is a really good cushion shoe, but I don't think it's one that necessarily steps up enough from what you're getting from other shoes. And actually things like the Hurricane 24 I still prefer, or indeed the other shoes in the Brooks range, and I'd still be looking at them ahead of this. And if you are looking for something that's really special and versatile at this kind of price, then it is something like the Asics Super Blast 2 or the New Balance Balos, which do deliver something quite exciting for their price tags. Glycerin Max is a really good shoe. It's a great cushion shoe. If that's just what you want, you're the best really cushioned Brooks shoe out there, it will do that job, but it doesn't do enough for me to make me think I'd pay more for this as opposed to something like the Hurricane.
Verdict then, the Glycerin Max is a surprise hit for me. I thought I'd struggle with that whopping great midsole, but I think it's one of the better massive stack matte cushion running shoes that I've run in yet, and a great option for easy day miles. I actually picked it as one of my easy day mile shoes in our video that's up on the channel. You can find that now. Now, if you're a heavier runner, I think this could be one to look at. I've done a lot of miles in it on very, very tired, beaten up legs, post-marathon, the day after, and there's a cocoon protective comfort here. You can get that from cheaper rivals for sure, but I feel some of the comparable sort of heavier soft shoes that might be in this bracket can at times feel like they're dragging you down a bit, where the Glycerin Max I think offers up some energy. There's a bit more kind of immediacy to it when you roll onto that kind of smaller cell DNA tuned forefoot for the springy toe offs that it provides. Some runners might find they can pick up the pace in this shoe too, and I definitely think that many runners can use this for longer mid-pace range runs. But for me, there's too much shoe here, a bit too much weight to want to do much more in it than my most easy day shoes. For that, I don't find the weight a problem. Anything faster than easy, I think, there's a bit too much going on. But I am intrigued to see where Brooks takes this new DNA tuned foam next, because I think it works. Big question for me is, can you get a similar ride out of less stack, or how might this sort of profile in a sort of lower stack shoe? It's going to be interesting to see which of Brooks shoes adopt this DNA tune next and how they tune the foam. But for the Glycerin Max, I think it's one of the most innovative Brooks shoes I've seen. Yes, at $200 or £180, it's pricey, and you will still need to be a fan of mega stack shoes to get on with this wedge underfoot. But I'd say it's definitely one to consider alongside shoes like the New Balance More V4, V5. I definitely prefer it to the Hoka Skyward X. I'm yet to run in the Asics Super Blast, but maybe one to put into the mix with that.
That's it from us on this review of the Glycerin Max. Thanks a lot for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, click that little bell. And if you're going to catch me below, you can find a link to our podcast, which comes out a couple of times each month. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time.